Hi, this is Stan Bush.
Hi, this is Stephanie Calvert.
This is John Payne.
This is Jack Hughes.
Hey everyone, this is Britt Lightning from Vixen.
Hi, I'm Carrie Stevens.
Hello, I'm Kofi Baker.
And you're listening to Play That Rock and
Roll. Well, Ryan, thanks for joining us here today. You are the author of Springsteen, Album by Album. I know there's a new edition of that book that just came out. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I wanted to start with laying some groundwork about why you wanted to write the book, which I imagine is, your fandom. So my first question is, how did you discover Springsteen, and what was it about him that made you a fan?
How I discovered Springsteen is interesting. There's two answers to that question. There's how I really got into Springsteen, and when I first became aware of Bruce Springsteen. So when I first became aware of Bruce Springsteen, I was 9 years old, going on 10 in the summer of 1984 when Born in the USA came out, and he was everywhere. We were living in an apartment building in Ypsilanti, Michigan. We didn't have cable. My parents were not very into music. We didn't have video games. But my friends upstairs on the third floor, we were on the ground floor, they were on the third floor. They had all this stuff. They had the best G.I. Joes, they had the best Transformers, they had Intellivision and Atari, and they had MTV. And so
they had money.
Pretty quickly they had a house and they didn't live above us anymore. But so, you think back on that summer, and I think everybody, like every generation has an age where they're like, that was the best year for pop music. But, 83, 84, 85 was Purple Rain and Like a Virgin and Walk This Way. Maybe that was a little earlier. Born in the USA and Thriller and Weird Al and all of this stuff. And so upstairs they had MTV, and we were absorbing all of these like huge pop culture moments. And the interesting thing for me was that I didn't find Springsteen that interesting. And I didn't find him that interesting. My grandfather ran a gas station for a long time in Ann Arbor, and you would hang out there there was the mechanics, Pete, and all these other guys. And then on like Friday nights, we would get dispatched by my grandmother to go pull him out of the bar. I still go to that bar sometimes. I can still, like, in my mind, like I can only see that bar from like the point of view of a child. Like it's weird to walk in there as an adult who can see over things. And the imagery of Springsteen at that point was of a guy just like the guys that worked at the gas station that my dad knew, that that wasn't that interesting. And then you had the other album that went unmentioned there was Van Halen's 1984, and you had David Lee Roth being pulled out of a dressing room in a towel and handcuffs, and you're like, that's interesting, that's something I haven't seen before. And you had Eddie Van Halen playing like an alien, and so that was what kind of captured my imagination at the time. But I was very aware of Bruce Springsteen and the idea of Bruce Springsteen, and this very American iconography that was being thrown at us, even though I had no idea what the word iconography meant at the time. Spin ahead, 15 years or so, and I'm in Portland, Oregon, and I'm working in a newspaper, and I'm living in a tiny little apartment, but affordable still at that point, in kind of a cool part of town that had a great record store. And I'm kicking around it one day, and they've just got Ghost of Tom Joad on special, in like 1997, 1998. And so I grabbed it. And that was like, I don't know how many people got into Springsteen via the Ghost of Tom Joad, but it couldn't have been many people. I am one of them. I'm proud of it. I will swear by it. And then you started to work your way back. And as an adult, so much of his wrestling with adulthood and what it means to find community, to find a place and a purpose, and and to, expand into something more meaningful than your very narrow kind of youthful view of the world. That really resonated at a time when I was trying to sort out some of those things myself. And, so all of that happened before I ever saw him step foot on a stage. And then once that happens, I was retelling the story to somebody a few days ago. Was on the Magic tour in 2008. We went to the show in Portland and then picked up a friend the next day with another guy I know. And we went up to Seattle for the show the next night. And one of them had never seen Springsteen before. And we ended up down in the pit right in front the whole show, banging on the guitar during Born to Run and all this other stuff. And the show ends and the lights come up and everybody's milling about. And I looked at Brian, who had never seen Springsteen before. And I said, "So what do you think?" He said, "I think I want to call my mom and tell her that I love her." Which is not necessarily a rare occurrence, and the community and the ability to bring people together. We went over to Europe last summer, and I saw the last two shows of the European tour in Munich and then Monza, Italy, and Monza especially. It was this perfect summer day, standing in a field in the middle of an F1 track with 70,000 people. We met this guy from the UK, and on the train ride out to Monza from Milan, and like he and I message all the time now. It's what was funny was he ended up being a big NFL fan, and I was wearing a University of Michigan hat, and he asked me about the Detroit Lions because he's a Vikings fan and got into it from fantasy football. But it's the world shrinks a lot when you start getting way out into it. But the number of people that were there from different places that were there for this like shared purpose, singing at the top of their lungs, like this joyous day was, it was maybe my favorite live experience ever. It was just a really, beautiful thing. And then you add to that, now decades of meaningful work. And when the opportunity came to, would you like to sit down and write about this and think about this? And it was a very easy yes. And then when they wanted me to update it the first time, it was an easier yes. And then we updated it now for his 75th birthday, but it's also the 10th anniversary of the book coming out too. And an even easier yes. So
very cool. Yeah, we'll talk about that in just a second because it's such a cool project. I mean, let's go back to when you were writing it originally. When you were writing the chapter about Born in the USA, which, as you mentioned, you were a kid when this came out. When you were writing the chapter about Born in the USA, what would you say was the most interesting aspect of that album to write about? Was it something you learned, or was it just something you were very passionate about? What do you remember about writing that chapter?
It's a hard chapter to write. Born in the USA and Born to Run were the two hardest chapters to write by far because they're so big and they're so important. They've been written about so much. Like it was, in terms of just like, what is an easier task? Writing about the Seeger Sessions record was a lot easier because it wasn't nearly as picked over. And also you got to do really cool stuff like go and read all of Pete Seeger's testimony before the House Committee on Un-American Activities, where he just stuck it to Joe McCarthy and his people and stuff. It was just fantastic. Like you can find that online, and I know this isn't why we're talking here, but if you have the time and the inclination, go read Pete Seeger just running these guys in circles. It's fantastic. And so with Born in the USA, you had this massive hit, this thing that was everywhere. Like almost every song was a single, and the ones that weren't could have been. It remains interesting to me that when Bruce talks about it, he talks about being largely ambivalent about a lot of those songs, minus the title track, which also has become one of the most misunderstood songs in the history of pop music. And at this point, it's willfully misunderstood. If you're still doing that, you're doing that willfully. You're not doing that out of, or you're the dumbest person on the planet. It's one of those two things. And I guess it could be both. Why not both? In certain cases. And so trying to because these, most of these chapters are 2,500 to 3,500 words, trying to find an economy of words in a record that had very little economy to it. I mean, they recorded, at least in terms of bits and pieces and ideas and different versions, depending on who you talk to, upwards of 80 songs. They spent forever on this thing. And, just when he thought he was done, they were like, no, we still think you need one more. And he got kind of pissed off and wrote Dancing in the Dark, which is, I think, it's weird to say something from that record is underrated, something that was a huge hit and was everywhere, and is still played every night, 40 years later. But it's such a sneaky cool song, and like my favorite kind of song, which is like the happy sounding sad song. The guy, the guy who is very much Bruce, in that, like, you could just tell he was out of gas and somehow wrote this magnificent pop hit. I get up in the evening, I ain't got nothing to say, I come home in the morning, go to bed feeling the same way. Like, it's just empty. Like, I got nothing left to say, and now I'm going to take that nothingness and turn it into something really, really cool with period appropriate synths. That and so
Courtney Cox.
and Courtney Cox. And so to get back to your question, I think, sorting through all of that because by the time you're writing this book, you have access to a lot of the outtakes. A lot of those tracks, I think it was probably disc 3, is a fair amount of Born in the USA. I haven't listened to those in order in a long time, so I could be wrong with the disc, but and so you're seeing what else could have been on there, and you're pulling, like, okay, could this have worked? Could this have not? Like, one of my favorite Springsteen songs is None But the Brave, which didn't make it on the record. I understand, like, I try sometimes to, like, okay, what would you take out and where would you put that in? And it doesn't make, it doesn't make any sense. That feels like a good choice to have pulled that out in the context of an album that didn't really even have the big kind of theme tying it together. It was, a bunch of, you can force a theme into it, and that force is maybe even a little too strong a word, but it didn't have the determination of Darkness on the Edge of Town. It didn't have the romanticism of Born to Run. It didn't have the starkness of Nebraska. It didn't have the broad ambition of bringing all of the weaponry that you bring to the live show into one double album like The River did, that also wrestled with really that sense of adulthood and impending challenges and all of that. It just had a collection of really kick-ass songs, and the explosion of his career into a stratosphere that very, very few people have ever been in. And so, placing all of that into the right context is, in under 25. Like, you could write, and people have. Stephen Hyden just published one this week. You can write whole ass books on that record, and so digging into it and going to work on it, and then keeping it to 3,500 words was the challenge.
No, I understand that, and yeah, it's always fun to play those the what do you call it, like record sequencer, where you pull that, because the one I think about is I like the song Pink Cadillac, and I guess that was the last one that was cut. And then I read on Wikipedia that the one that beat it out was I'm Going Down, which is my favorite song on Born in the USA. So I'm like, oh, I guess I can't make that cut then.
Janie, Don't Lose Your Heart.
Oh,
what comes out for that? Stand On It. Loved Stand On It. Would burn some money to see Stand On It played live.
Kind of surprised that the reissue of the album doesn't include a full box set with all of these outtakes and B-sides and for one massive collection.
Yeah, my guess is they feel like most of them have been out there in some form or another. But I mean, what any of us wouldn't give for a little time to play in the archive and see if we could Okay, but what if you assemble all these and package it out? It's got to
Yeah.
be a few more Annie Leibovitz outtakes
Oh yeah.
and all of that. Hat in the other back pocket. So
No kidding. Yeah, that's
no.
funny. Well, I want to double back to something you mentioned just a little while ago about the title track being perhaps the most misunderstood uh, song maybe ever. And I'll second what you said about if you're still misunderstanding that now, that's on you. That's not on
Yeah.
anybody else. But I will say that I also think now there's another intentional misunderstanding. You see this maybe in more conservative circles where they describe the song as anti-American, and I feel that is also a
Oh God, yes.
misinterpretation and perhaps even worse than the original. To call, I think to call Born in the USA anti-American is pretty lousy. But I don't want to get off on too much of a rant. I want to go back to when you first heard the song Born in the USA. When I first heard it when I was a kid, you know, I didn't know anything about lyrics. I didn't know anything about Vietnam. I thought it was kind of an airheaded patriotic anthem, like "You Can Still Rock in America" by Night Ranger or "Real American" by Rick Derringer. One of those kind of '80s things. And until I saw the video. And then that kind of gave me an idea that like, oh wait, no, this isn't like a party song. And then as I grew up, obviously I learned what the song was about. So, yes, of course, at this point, no one has any excuse to misinterpret the song now. But back when you first heard it, did that did it throw you for a loop too?
I mean, when you're nine, you hear choruses.
Right. Yes.
First and foremost, you hear hooks, you hear choruses. Verses are, I don't know, verses are for high school kids
Yeah.
or something like that. I don't quite know how that. I say that, but my middle school daughter can hit you with every verse that Noah Kahn, Taylor Swift, or Olivia Rodrigo sing and tell you all about them. So maybe I was just the airhead. In that particular case. It. I don't think I really began to think about it until I was adult. I didn't understand Vietnam until I saw my dad looking for the names of his friends on the
Oh,
memorial wall in Washington D.C.
wow.
My in hindsight, my earliest understanding of World War II is that it turned my grandfather and my dad's uncle and a lot of his friends into people who kind of sat quietly around tables and drank a lot of beer and didn't talk about what they saw and where and where they were. And circle back to your earlier point because I think it's a really important point when you're talking about the title track is to me of all of the issues of American identity and American history, American future, American present that Bruce Springsteen has dealt with at various points in his career. It might be the most American song, the most pro-American song, because what is more American than questioning your government and demanding better treatment for people who deserve it? And that's what that song does.
Yes.
That song is about broken promises. Um, and there's a whole bunch of Bruce Springsteen songs about broken promises. They've been broken by earlier generations. They've been, passed down from father to the son and all of these other things. But, on a national scale, uh, that is a song about a nation breaking its promises, like its most sacred and profound promises to people who have sacrificed greatly for the founding ideals of the country. And when you're nine, you don't have that vocabulary
Oh,
at all. Like politics, I was talking about this with someone the other day when we were talking about Bruce. All politics is local, they say, and so like you kind of you absorb politics before you understand what they are. Bruce absorbed them in watching, the way his father, not only suffering from mental illness, but just upturns and downturns in the economy and losing jobs in factories and stuff like that. the family around him as he grew up, the changes in the town and small town New Jersey and stuff like that. Bruce ingested all of that before he had a vocabulary, and it eventually came out in the music. That's maybe his greatest example of that. And meeting Ron Kovac and reading the book, and all of these things that
got it right here.
Yep, all of these things that that led to the creation and the writing and the performing of that song, and then deciding to release the song in its most powerful and in that moment also most misinterpretable form, like the acoustic version that pops up on tracks. There's no mistaking what that song is. The acoustic version with the slide guitar and stuff that he'll play live sometimes, there's no mistaking what that song is. But when you put that a huge Max Weinberg performance behind it, when it demands that you pump your fist, and it's no wonder that it goes well with fireworks.
Yeah, that's true. It's the, I mean, to me, it's just like a good example of effective art where, it's a piece that draws you in. And when you're in, that's when you're supposed to understand the message. I mean, anybody can write a political screed, but a lot of people just stay away from that because they don't want to hear it. But, give them something appealing, right, they'll come meet you there. So,
and it was,
go ahead.
I was gonna say it's one of the things that's really interesting about Born in the USA is you start to break it in, is like, because he was, ever since, it was really the River On where he started to get into like Hank Williams and the politics of that type of country music, and Woody Guthrie. Those were not like, in some ways Born in the USA is like the album that he was always meant to make, and made him the star that he was always wanting to be, because like he was not sitting around New Jersey, and like his big bang moment was not hearing "This Land Is Your Land." It was Elvis. Like, right. Elvis was a star. Like all the other stuff came a little bit later, and so you have a song that you could have in an acoustic form very much been pick Pete Seeger or Woody Guthrie, like it could have been that type of song, and it's on an album full of just absolute rock star bangers that were meant to be played in a stadium, and to this day are played in stadiums. And so it's one of the more interesting wrinkles in the album, is that thing got in there.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Ron Kovac. I read this Born on the 4th of July just last year for the first time. I know a lot of people read in high school. I didn't read it back then. I saw the movie a couple of years ago too. And, after reading the book, I can definitely understand why, these thoughts were in Bruce's head, when he wanted to, when he started writing that song. And I just wonder if you could, go back in time a little bit to when this album was released, or maybe a couple of years after, when you were, more aware of adult conversations. Was the Vietnam War and Vietnam veterans, were these touchy subjects in the 80s? Because I remember when I was a kid, I can think of a couple of hack movies from like even the early 2000s where the stereotype of a Vietnam vet is a pretty disrespectful presentation of like a guy in a wheelchair who is, triggered by loud noises, and then it's like played for laughs. And I think, right, thankfully we've gotten away from that kind of thing. But I guess I wonder what, I wonder if, this record and this song started to, or at least was a part of steering the conversation away from, those, nastier elements about the war, and or just making people think about it at all.
Yeah, I don't know that I am qualified to go that big on the national discourse. I do think, I do think that there was an eventual, because people were coming home, and there was a big anti-war movement in the States, and that, in some instances, certainly not all, and I try to be nuanced, especially these days where there are so many things that are some but not all, and everything gets painted with all
Yeah.
all of the time. For some people, being anti-war meant being anti-troop. It meant being anti the people that were there. Steve Earle has written about this. A lot of people have written about. I think a song called is it Johnny Come Lately? Johnny Come. Steve Earle song where guys' relatives come home from other wars and they're being celebrated. He comes home to an empty airstrip and nobody there. That's the same idea, behind Born in the USA, and this idea of all the things that we should be doing to support these people, not doing it. I'd like to think that that as a nation we grew up a little. I don't think there's much evidence of that these days.
No.
So there's not much maturity in the discourse. But whether Bruce had anything to do with that or not, I do not know. It's certainly it was nobody was ignoring what Reagan when Reagan tried to use it as a prop, and when Bruce punched back on that thing.
Yeah.
And it certainly would have made anybody who had been misinterpreting things, maybe I didn't say definitely, but maybe gave them pause and to take a look at it. And the thing art does is it empathizes. It's why it's important. It's trying to see the world through somebody else's eyes, through somebody else's experiences, trying to understand things that we ourselves don't haven't necessarily experienced, don't understand. Putting a story to the struggles of veterans coming back and having it be so massively popular can't hurt the empathy.
Yeah, that's true. But, unfortunately, songs don't change policy. I remember,
No.
During the Iraq War, there was that I don't know if it was a scandal, but the stuff around the Walter Reed Hospital and about how those veterans weren't being, treated in a way that they should be. And it's just very interesting, and I think it goes back to what you were saying about how Born in the USA is not only not anti-American, it is one of the most patriotic
Yeah.
songs that I've ever heard, but not in that Night Ranger way, right?
Right.
Not in the airheaded, you still rockin' America way. So
Not in a Team America sort of
right.
way.
Exactly. So yeah, this is very disappointing to see people misinterpret it on both ways when it's talking about something very important. So I really appreciate your perspective on this. And my last question about I'll say the album as a whole for you is you talked about your fandom a little bit. I Born in the USA sort of is at this crossroads of a lot of old school original Bruce fans weren't crazy about the bombast and the 80s production. But at the same time, there was this whole new group of a pop audience that came in because Bruce had become a superstar and written very accessible, pop rock. Um, when you look at his catalog, where do you place roughly? Where do you place Born in the USA? And what is it about it that puts it in that spot?
Yeah, these are always both fun and difficult conversations. So to me, you have to start. I always feel like you have to start to define some parameters. So I think his best record is Darkness on the Edge of Town, and I think his most important record is Born to Run, because without Born to Run hitting, who knows? Maybe none of this happens. There's this, you could sit now and say that, well, he was inevitable. He was too good. But nothing's inevitable,
right?
And record, even back then, record labels had only so much patience. It's Peter Ames Carlin, who wrote the foreword for this 10 years ago and wrote the biography of Bruce, who's a good friend of mine, he wrote a fantastic book about Warner Brothers records and kind of like this wild period where you could just put out weird records and market them in weird ways. And out of that, you got Randy Newman, and you got all of these fantastic, fantastic people. But that type of patience was, and it's like, okay, you're my loss over here because I have, these guys over here, sort of thing. And I think everybody kind of pegged Bruce for being the guy over here that was going to pay for some other stuff, and so he needed to do that. And so Born to Run gave him the opportunity to make Darkness on the Edge of Town. I would probably, I can't. Can I put it over Nebraska? I don't know that I can put it over Nebraska. It's Nebraska is such a wildly, the story of that record is also a book that, has been written as well. But, there's nothing I love more than, a hot summer evening around dusk with a bourbon and putting on my vinyl copy of Nebraska, where you can kind of hear the record player working and stuff.
Awesome.
So, Born to Run is easily the best summers out, windows down, turn it all the way up record of the group. So I think I'd probably put it 4 after Darkness, Born to Run, Nebraska, Born in the USA. And then we're not going to run through all of them.
No, that's impossible.
It's a fool's errand. And then probably and then probably, oh God, what goes next? There are options. Well, let's just we got to Born in the USA. So I would put it. I would put it 4. I would put it 4, but it's the first one I'm putting on when the temperature gets up above about like 65, and I can put the windows down.
Nice. Absolutely. Okay, well, hey, let's talk about the new edition of your book, Springsteen Album by Album. You mentioned there's some new material in that. What can you tell us is what's the new chapters?
So we updated it for Western Stars, Letter to You, and Only the Strong Survive. And then we wrote a new afterword that I centered on the last 2 shows of the European tour last year, which were it was the first chance I'd had to see him. On that run, I had missed the shows in the Midwest. I was out of the country then too, actually. So, and I'd always wanted to see him in Europe, and figured how many chances are you going to get? It turns out I could have gone this summer, and it's looking like I could maybe go next summer too, and I might.
Well, hey, you saw him in Europe. He plays some songs of this in concert, but he never plays the title track when he's in the States. Sometimes he plays it overseas.
Yeah.
Did he play it when you saw him?
He did not. He had been, and it was one of the changes. I was hoping to get it on the second night in Milan, and they kind of popped it out and put an extended version of Twist and Shout at the end of the things before I'll See You in My Dreams. But as somebody who is now approaching his 50th birthday, and dealing with all of the 50-year-old things, the meditations on mortality and the celebration of just being there was really great on that tour. And it was fun to dig in to all 3 of those records because they were really interesting, and they arrived at interesting times. Like Western Stars, he wasn't going to tour because it was this big orchestral record, so he did a movie on it. Like, I think it's a fantastic record. A lot of guys who, and he's always filled his songs with guys who are this far from breaking free. But one of the interesting things about Western Stars is that line never snaps. Something keeps them connected. It's a woman here in the distance that could. It's a memory. It's something. It's it's definitely an older gentleman's record, as evidenced by the title track. The guy who had a hit once upon a time and is now, it's kind of like the actor in Western Stars is somewhat the warning in Glory Days. But you know,
Oh,
they say, but they, you know, they now they celebrate that in concert too. It's, you know, there's a wink and a nod every time they play Glory Days.
oh yeah.
He and Steve, they're very aware of that. And so, you know, you had Western Stars, and then you had COVID, and
Yep.
then you had Letter to You come out in the middle of that, with another movie, because one, the format worked really well for Western Stars, but also there was nothing else you could do. And so but it was, you know, the record, and he's talked about it a lot. Steve Van Zandt has talked about it a lot. You know, the record was the story of a band, of multiple bands, really, starting with the Castiles for him up through, you know, 50 years of the more or less of the E Street Band. And so watching them record and be in the studio, it just made it seem like, not that seeing them on stage doesn't make it seem like a blast, because that also, I mean, that obviously seems like the best job in the world, but just like watching them in their little clubhouse full of guitars and, like, you know, joking about things, where there's Bruce tells Max, come in hard, but soft. He's like, so come in, or no, he's talking to Roy. He's like, just play it just louder. So you want me to play harder? No, just, a little loud. Like the language that they have
Yeah.
amongst themselves after recording all those years are things that make no sense to outsiders,
Right.
but they're fun as hell to watch. But then, you were able to, I was also able to dive into, he started doing his radio show on E Street Radio. And, when, radio was such a foundational thing to that era of rock star. That was, he talks about, the sound of Motown and stuff drifting in on his mom's radio, and the way his mom and his aunts loved to dance to these hits and stuff like that. And, you realized, as we were all stuck at home working through our own stuff, if we were lucky in our house that we were able to work remotely through everything and all of that, how nice it was to hear a familiar voice pop over the radio when he would, it really was a meaningful thing at a time when you wondered if, however briefly, if any of those meaningful things were going to happen again. Like, I mean, I remember hearing Ghosts, like, a record came out and I downloaded it and I went for a walk, and I could imagine what Ghosts was going to be like live. Like, you could see the way that was going to go. And I'll dead honest with you, I started crying on my walk because I was like, I don't know that this is ever going to happen.
Yeah.
And like, and so he turns to what we all did, which what are the things that we love that we can just focus on? Old soul songs.
Yeah.
Old soul songs are awesome. They
Yes.
are. Like, give me the saddest one around and sing it. Give me the right singer, and it will make you happier than any happy song that you have ever heard. And so, that kind of paired up with him doing a podcast with Barack Obama and digging into the roots of, of their stories and how that related to the American story as a whole and stuff. So, it's been an interesting period in his career because it's really been more reflective than he had ever been in the past. It's I think there's always been this move forward, move forward, move forward, move forward, be in the moment. Magic was a record that was very much of the Bush
Oh yeah.
administration and a pushback on some of the things that are happening. Seeger Sessions, same thing, was really an album of protest songs. And some really, I mean, even Pay Me My Money Down is a little bit of the working man trying to get anything that he is owed from the boss. And so he's with the Broadway show and the book, and Letter to You certainly had a foot in his past and how it helped shape the present. All those old soul songs, same thing. And so it was interesting to kind of look at that through the lens of what we were all going through, what he was going through at the time, and then out the other end to be back in front of 70,000 people in the middle of an F1 track outside Milan, Italy, on just a perfect summer day in July, light breeze, good people, very short lines for beer. It was
a dream.
Getting back into Milan was a different deal that night
Yeah.
because we were up near the stage, and so you had to get behind 70,000 people going out to get back to the buses, to get to the train station, to get back into Milan from Monza. But I was tempted to go see him in Milan again this summer, just to go to San Siro Stadium, which everyone said would be a lot easier transportation wise. But lovely time. It was fun to revisit it, and should the occasion arise and the publisher reach out in a few more years and say you want to update it again, I will do it again in a second, because it's just fun to write about him. He puts so much thought into what he does. You feel like you owe as much thought as you're trying to make sense of it through your lens, through the lens of the culture and the times and all of that. It's a challenging job writing about him, but it's a ton of fun.
Absolutely. Well said. Where can fans get the book?
What's
the best way that supports you?
I don't know that there is a way with this particular book that supports me best. They pay me they pay me well enough. They pay me well enough up front on this particular book. I would love to say
money down.
Yes, they paid me my money down. I would love to tell you to check out your local independent bookstore. First and foremost, we've got a great one here in Ann Arbor called Literati, but they're everywhere and they need support. And if you can wait, I bet they can order it for you. If they don't have it, if you feel like you absolutely need it overnight with 1-day shipping, it is out in the U.S. on June 26th, and I bet Amazon can have it to you on the 27th.
Hey, there you go.
So,
all right. And
they can maybe have it to you on the 26th if you order it, depending on when you're hearing this. So,
yes, absolutely. They'll get it out very quick, and I'm sure they should also package it with this. We got to give this one a shout out. This is your other book, A Good Life All the Way. I've started reading it already. This is about Jimmy Buffett. Real quick, since Jimmy has passed, let's close with reflecting on this book. What has that project been to you now that unfortunately Jimmy's no longer with us?
That project meant a lot. That was the first, this book, Springsteen album by album, it has a form and it has a function, and it arrived with, you knew what went where. That was a book that started because I looked up one day. I had been a huge Buffett fan. Like growing up, we didn't travel anywhere. We lived here in Michigan. If we went anywhere, we drove down I-75 to see my uncle in Florida every couple of years. And when I first heard Jimmy, it was a buddy in college who got me into him. There was a sense of elsewhere in his music that nobody else had. There were places that I had never heard of. There was this sense of a broader world, and I got really, really into it. And then I graduated and I got jobs that sent me flying all over the country covering sports and stuff like that for newspapers. And I kind of drifted away from it for a while until I got off the road, until I had a kid, until I got laid off, and I was sitting in my backyard listening to A1A and staring at the stars and thinking about elsewhere. And then I happened to notice how big Margaritaville had gotten, and how just not the song, but the entire enterprise. There were two restaurants when I first went to Key West and New Orleans, and suddenly they were all over the place. And there were hotels, and there were resorts, and there were frozen concoction makers, which is a $400 blender. There were healthy drinks, which seemed to me to go absolutely against the idea of Margaritaville, even though the guy in that song clearly needed one.
Yeah.
And Margaritaville to me is another happy sounding sad song. The guy in that song is falling apart. And, and Jimmy was at a point in his career when he wrote it that, Key West, which he had fallen in love with, was changing. The tourists were finally starting to find it. He had not followed up on the momentum that Come Monday had produced. And so there was a level of frustration in all of that. But I looked at what Margaritaville became and I was like, how do you navigate 40 years of American culture so successfully? Like, what do you have to do that? And, could, like, the original idea for the book was almost like a first person travel book. Like, could you travel around the current the modern Margaritaville and see where it came from what it became? Is there anything left of what it's of where it, how it started in what it is today? And it eventually became a biography because you realize is that Margaritaville does not exist. I mean, obviously it doesn't exist without Jimmy Buffett because he wrote the song, but it does not exist without the idea of Jimmy Buffett and the personality of Jimmy Buffett to push that thing. And he is, everybody liked him. He brought joy into everything. And you talk to, you talk to some of the people that are around for the recording of the last record, and Will Kimbrough, who co-wrote Bubbles Up, which has become, an anthem since Jimmy's death, but probably would have, even without that happening. And it was just, he never let on that he was sick. He never did. Like, he was just, Will talked about Jimmy showing up in the studio, and suddenly, on day 2 of the first run of recording in Nashville, and everybody had been doing their job on day 1, and the vibe was great, and everything was wonderful as they were working. And then on day 2, Jimmy shows up, and Will said people were laughing more, people were smiling more. He goes, "You are now in Jimmy world," and he pushed that out everywhere. And it's, he became a guy because of the restaurants and the blenders and all this other stuff that you could discount the work, you could discount the art. And what I wanted to do with that book was point out that, for all that we celebrate John Prine and people like that, Jerry Jeff Walker, Jimmy was one of their contemporaries and every bit the songwriter, and they thought so too. So like
from Bob Dylan, right?
Yeah.
Where the first name out of his mouth is Jimmy Buffett when he's asked about his favorite songwriters. I think that surprised a lot of people.
And so, it did. And, because it's Dylan, you always kind of look at it and go, is he joking? Because you never know with Dylan. Right. It makes him one of the great characters to parse over all of these decades. But I will remain very proud of that book, and it was a true joy to kind of trace his path through the Gulf Coast and down to the Keys, and up into Nashville. And when I was reporting it, the cheapest way to spend a week in Key West was to Airbnb a sailboat. You can do that, and it's awesome.
Oh wow, that does sound awesome. Well, I think you nailed it about the joy. He just brought joy to people's lives. When he died, I posted a video on my channel, and that was the word I used.
He lived one of the great lives. I mean, he put his passport to better use than I would imagine almost any other American has ever put his passport to use. He was as comfortable with presidents as he was with just, I think one of the lines I used recently was he's comfortable with presidents as he was with pirates and poets, and he spent plenty of time around all of them. He was. I tried unsuccessfully, so I pulled it out of the book. But like, he was a little bit like Forrest Gump. Like, he was in the background of every great scene of the last 40 years. Like, he was there in Austin when Austin was becoming a thing. He was there in Nashville when Nashville was becoming this place after Dylan went there to record Blonde on Blonde, that a lot of singer-songwriters were going to, not just big sounding country bands and stuff like that. He's been around Hollywood, he's been around politics. He just, I got to imagine his phone was just loaded with numbers that would blow people's mind. And it was like I remember talking to Alan Toussaint. Alan Toussaint wrote probably the first 5 pages of the modern American songbook. Like, the dude was he had a Rolls Royce whose license plate was songs. because that's what Alan Toussaint had. And Alan Toussaint wrote a song called "Hang with Jimmy Buffett" because he was sitting around one day watching the news, and I was like, "Man, I just want to hang with Jimmy Buffett."
Yeah.
So,
well, hey, listen, man, I feel I could talk to you for literally hours about music. This has been a real treat. It was great meeting
I've
you.
really
I
enjoyed
really
this.
hope
Thank you.
that you will come back to talk about this more in
We'll
depth.
do a full
later on.
Full Buffett chat whenever you want.
Absolutely. Congrats on the reissue of the Springsteen book. And thanks so much for stopping by. I look forward to talking to you again soon about Jimmy.
Likewise, enjoyed this. Thank you.
All right.